When you look back at American history, Richard Nixon's presidency is just this massive paradox. It's this incredible story of triumph, of achievements that literally changed the world, smashed right up against a fall from grace so catastrophic it changed the country forever. So, that's the big question, right? How does a president with this just an incredible list of accomplishments end up being remembered for one single gigantic scandal? How can both of those things be true about the same person in the same presidency? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to try and piece together today.
Okay, so to really get Nixon, you first have to get the America he stepped into. We're talking 1968. The country felt like it was completely unraveling. It was just torn apart by the Vietnam War, by massive civil rights protests. I mean, the whole social fabric felt like it was ripping at the seams.
And right into that chaos steps Richard Nixon. And he makes a promise. His whole campaign boiled down to these two powerful ideas: bringing back law and order to the streets and getting peace with honor to end that incredibly unpopular war in Vietnam. And boy, did that message hit home for millions of Americans.
And you know what? In his first term, he didn't just deliver, he delivered in ways that were absolutely historic. On the world stage, he was basically redesigning the whole global power structure. And back home, he was pushing through policies that would change America for good.
Okay, just think about how big of a deal this was. It's 1972, and Richard Nixon. This is a guy who built his career on being a hardcore anti-communist. He gets on a plane and becomes the first sitting U.S. president to visit the People's Republic of China. That one trip, it just shattered more than 20 years of total diplomatic silence. It completely redrew the map of the Cold War. A total game changer. And it wasn't just China. Nixon had this groundbreaking strategy for dealing with the other communist superpower, the Soviet Union. It was called détente. It's a French word, basically means an easing of tensions. He's meeting with the Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev, and the whole goal is to dial down the temperature, to pull the world back from a potential nuclear showdown. And look, this détente thing wasn't just a bunch of handshakes and photo ops. It led to something real. It led to the SALT I Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. This was the first time in history that the US and the Soviet Union actually agreed to put a cap on their nuclear weapons. Think about that. It was a huge concrete step away from the edge of Armageddon. So what about Vietnam? What about that promise of peace with honor? Well, he had this three-part plan. First up was Vietnamization. The idea was, hey, let's train and arm the South Vietnamese forces so they can handle the fighting themselves. Second, start pulling American troops out, slowly but surely. And then the final piece, in 1973, they signed the Paris Peace Accords, which gets most of the U.S. forces out of there. All right, now this is the part of his legacy that honestly blows a lot of people's minds, because back home, his impact was just massive, and maybe not in the way you'd expect. He's the guy who created the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. He signed the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act. He started OSHA to keep workers safe on the job. And his administration helped get the ball rolling on Title IX, which totally transformed women's access to education and sports. These are not small things. These are huge progressive accomplishments. But, and there's always a but with Nixon, even with all these incredible wins, the country was still a powder keg. Just beneath the surface of all those policy achievements, all the old divisions that got him elected were still bubbling away, kind of like a warning of the storm that was about to hit. The country was still just ripped in two. You still had constant protests, clashes over civil rights, over these huge social changes. And Nixon's whole law and order message, well, it played great with his supporters. But for a lot of other people, protesters, minority groups, it felt like they were being targeted. And that just poured more fuel on the fire. And as if all that social turmoil wasn't enough, the economy was in trouble. Inflation was soaring. His solutions were, well, they were drastic. He actually tried to put controls on wages and prices. And then, and this is a big one, he completely upended the world's financial system by taking the US dollar off the gold standard, a move we still feel today. And all of this, all of it, brings us to the scandal. The one that would end up casting a shadow over everything else he ever did. The one word that, for so many people, is the Nixon presidency. Watergate. So here's how the whole thing came crashing down. It started with what everyone thought was just some, a third-rate burglary at the Democratic headquarters in the Watergate building back in June of '72. But the break-in wasn't the real crime. The cover-up was. Slowly, investigators started pulling at this thread, and it unraveled this whole web of lies that led straight to the Oval Office.
And then came the bombshell, secret White House tapes. You could hear Nixon himself, in his own voice, plotting to block the FBI investigation. And just like that, it was over. The truth was out.
With that kind of smoking gun, Congress had no choice. They drew up articles of impeachment, and the charges were just devastating. Obstruction of justice for the cover-up, abuse of power, contempt of Congress for stonewalling them. It was clear to everyone that impeachment wasn't just possible, it was a sure thing. And so, facing that certainty, Richard Nixon did something no president had ever done before. On August 8, 1974, he resigned from office. The first, and still the only American president ever to quit the job. And there you have it, the whole paradox, laid out side by side. On one side of the scale, you have these monumental diplomatic achievements, stuff that literally pulled the world back from the edge. On the other, you have the crimes, the paranoia, the cover-up that led to his total and utter collapse. The contrast is it's staggering.
So, where does that leave us? What are we supposed to make of all this? How do you even begin to wrap your head around a legacy that has so much brilliance and vision right alongside these unforgivable abuses of power? And look, this isn't just ancient history. Here's why it still matters so much today. Watergate left this deep, deep scar on the country. It absolutely shattered the public's trust in the government, and especially in the presidency. And because of that, a whole wave of reforms came through. New laws about transparency, about limiting presidential power, things that are still a huge part of our political world.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to that final nagging question. So, who was Richard Nixon? Was he a great leader whose full potential we never got to see? Or was he the ultimate warning about how power can corrupt absolutely? The thing is, the answer is probably yes to both. And that, right there, is the complicated, frustrating, and absolutely fascinating paradox of Richard Nixon.